Welcome to Law and Life, the Levoritz Approach.
Hello and welcome to Law and Life, the Levoritz Approach with attorney Yoni Levoritz. Yoni is the founder of Levoritz Law Firm and is recognized for his exceptional skill in family law, his compassionate manner, and his commitment to achieving favorable outcomes for his clients. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is Business Ownership in Divorce, Navigating the Challenges of Asset Division. Yoni, it's so great to see you.
Great to see you too, Kevin. Thank you for having me.
So we touched on a little bit of this last episode, so this is great because we can flesh some of this out a little bit more. When one spouse is a business owner in a divorce, how does the ownership of the business impact the overall asset division?
Well, in terms of the actual overall asset division, it basically just adds an asset to the pot. So it's one more thing for the parties to divide, and it's one more thing for the parties to figure out how much it's worth, and then it's another thing to have valued. So what happens is you basically have the court-appointed neutral appraiser. That appraiser is going to go ahead and take a look at the business. From there, it's going to come up with a number. Now, depending upon that number, you might be able to say, well, the other spouse is not working in the business, has no sweat equity, doesn't know how to run the business. So we're going to say that it's worth 30% to the non-working spouse, okay? So it's going to add 30% of some number to her pocket or his pocket for their contributions in taking care of the children and taking care of the house and doing everything that the other spouse was unable to do so that that spouse could go out and make money and build the business.
Okay. And how deep of a look do these neutral parties give? Like how intense are these? It's probably somewhat of an audit, right?
It depends upon the expert appointed by the court. Some are very good and some really aren't. The good ones do a very, very deep dive. They go through bank statements. They go through credit card statements. They go through tax returns. They come down to the establishment and see how it works. They go ahead and look at cash components. They look at cash register tapes. They look at point of sale systems. Some of them really do a thorough job. Others, they look at the tax returns. They look at what the Bureau of Labor Statistics has to say about certain businesses, and they look at certain industry-specific reference guides, and they try and figure out a ballpark of what it's worth. Many of them are just guessing. It's more of an art than a science, unfortunately, for some of them. And for some, it's more a science than an art. And you want the person who thinks of it more of as a science and not as an art, that they can go ahead and actually come up with a real value for what it's worth.
When you run into somebody who you feel your client's getting an unfair shake because maybe they're more of the art than the science, do you have any recourse as the attorney?
Sure. I write letters. I send things. I detail everything. I go ahead and I write up these different issues. Please look at the cash. Please look at, if it's a pharmacy, look at drug distributions, look at drug inventories. If it's a fruit store, look at the raw data as to what they're buying more than what they're selling, because if they're buying it, chances are they're selling it, then there's only a certain amount that's going to be going to waste. So if you got a truckload of tomatoes coming in, and that's going to sell for $50,000, let's say, you can actually say, listen, you know what, we're going to give credit for all these things that were purchased and base it upon a number that for the markup of those particular types of tomatoes. And there's actually a book that deals with, different fruits and different commodities, just like there is for mechanics. Mechanics have a book which talks about the average cost of repairs.
Yeah, the average hours and labor hours and stuff.
Correct.
If one spouse is concerned that the business interests may be undervalued or hidden during a divorce, well, let's just say undervalued, are there steps they can take right off the bat, or the best thing to do is to have their lawyer take care of it?
The best thing to do is have your lawyer take care of it. Okay, that might entail hiring private investigators. That might entail doing basically a sting operation where you set up a buy, you set up a sale, you set up something else. You have them talk about how they're going to handle it. We've done this with mortgage dealers or mortgage brokers, where we basically go ahead and talk about their commissions and the kickbacks they receive and how it works exactly. There are ways of dealing with these issues.
Wow, sting operations. Look at you, Yoni.
Well, sometimes you have to do them. I mean, you can't do it once the person has invoked the right to counsel. Okay, so you got to be careful about how you do it, because once they have counsel, it's sort of you talking to them. So you can't talk to someone who has counsel. Okay, But on the flip side of that, before the action is started and you start putting your ducks in a row and doing your pre-divorce planning, you can start figuring out how much someone is making.
Interesting stuff. What are some of the most common challenges faced by business owners during a divorce?
Business owners are faced with the fact that they may have not run their books cleanly, okay, which is the biggest problem for business owners. They want to maximize their gain. They want to maximize their lifestyle, but at the same time, they don't want to pay the taxes on it. I mean, we all hate paying taxes, but we all do it. Most of us are W-2 employees, and we have no choice but to pay the government. Many business owners feel there are ways around it. And that's a big problem.
Yeah, I would imagine. So basically, it's just you're saying that because that their business is getting a hard look, that they uncover some, shall we say, indiscretions?
Yes. Sometimes you even uncover two separate sets of books if you're lucky.
Wow. And that's not necessarily related to the divorce. That's just related to just a bad business owner, right?
Well, it's related to the divorce in the sense that you get more money on it, okay? Because the person has unclean hands, the person is going to be in a position where they can't prove what they make. All of a sudden, you end up with a needs-based award, which is a higher type of award than you'd get, let's say, a regular child support case. You end up with, situations where you get more money as a result of the fact that they can't prove these things. And therefore, courts, what they do is they call it imputation of income. They add income to what should be there. Okay. And they take these things into account, not necessarily in the business valuation, although sometimes they do as well.
What happens if a business's financial health isn't exactly in the best situation? Maybe it's been good in the past, but they're having a really down couple of years. How does that factor into the decision as far as the valuation?
Well, in terms of valuations, basically what you're going to have is a situation where the actual amount of the value of the business is going to be depressed. Therefore, if the business has been depressed, the valuation is going to be depressed. It's going to have less income. It's going to have less ability. It's going to have greater debts. It's going to be in a position where, how do I explain this best? That you're going to get less in equitable distribution. You're going to get less in support because the income is just not there anymore.
But if the spouse who doesn't own the business is like, hey, this business usually does really well, I know it'll do well in the future, it's just having a tough time right now, that's just bad timing, not nothing you can really do?
Well, you can get a different valuation date if it's going to change during the course of the divorce. And then you can say, listen, don't value it as of the date that the divorce started, value it as of 6 months later, value it as of a year later. You can go to the court and ask for a different valuation date, because courts can value the asset anytime between the date that the divorce started and the date of trial. Okay. And that could be years. Okay. That could be a year. That could be 2 years. That could be 4 years. It could be 7 years. It could be a very long period of time.
Yeah.
So if you feel the business is doing better, if you see all of a sudden they go from driving a Toyota to driving a Mercedes, okay, that things have turned around.
So you got to put your detective hat on.
Got to put your detective hat on. Absolutely.
So if there's a situation where a couple owns a business and one of the owners wants to retain full control after the divorce, do they buy out the other spouse's share, or how do they negotiate that?
That's very difficult to negotiate if they're both active participants in the business. If they're both active participants in the business, you're really going to need a court to determine the issue. And in all likelihood, the business is going to end up being sold.
And if one party really does not want to sell the business, how does that play out? What can they do?
They can have a trial on the issue.
Yeah.
But in general, most of what you have one person who's more involved and one person who's less involved. And the person who's less involved is going to get bought out or paid off by the person who's more involved. Plus, sometimes there are licenses involved in these businesses. So whoever holds the license, has the license, used the license, who did a large majority of the work on it, the more work you did in the business, the more active the asset was for you, the more likely you are to go ahead to be able to retain control.
So if one spouse is, maybe 70, 80% involved, the other one's 20 to 30% involved, but that 20 to 30% spouse does not want to give up control, still wants to be part of the business, does that generally at that point, is that when the court kind of says you're going to have to sell this thing?
Not really, because at a 20, 30% activity rate, I would say chances are the court's going to award it to the person who has the 80% or the 70% activity rate. I would say when you're really, truly 50% owners and you share in the stock in the company and you share in everything else in the company, you're more likely to have a situation like that. And, sometimes people will pay a premium to be able to hold on to the business.
Yeah, if they see the long-term, option there that they'll want to pay for it.
Correct.
And if one spouse really has nothing to do at all with the business, they still get a percentage because of the fact that they've, like we've said, they've stayed at home with the kids or took care of the house while the other spouse has been making all the money. And when the valuation happens, the independent party, they're not the ones who decide the percentage, right? They're the ones who just evaluate the business. And then does the judge decide the percentage?
Judge decides the percentage, or the parties decide the percentage. Okay. Average percentage for a non-participating spouse, you can look at the number of kids, you can look at direct and indirect contributions of the party and say, listen, without me, you never would have made it. If I didn't throw those Christmas parties, if I didn't throw those dinner parties, if I didn't go out and get myself dressed up and come to the office and make sure that everything was running while you were sick, the more you do for it, the more you're entitled to.
And yeah, I suppose that makes sense. And I suppose if you have no kids and you've got enough money where you have people cleaning your house and the spouse is really just kind of living on easy street, is there a situation where they'll get zero, or do they always get something?
They're always getting something.
Okay. So no matter what,
it's a marital asset. Some money is going to be paid on the business.
Okay.
And it's very rare that a spouse does nothing. Even if they have no children, they're still taking care of the household. They're still making sure their husband is supported. They're still making sure their husband is happy when they walk out the door in the morning, or their wife is happy, or their partner is happy. They're doing everything they can to make, if the marriage lasted 5, 10, 15 years, you're doing something right to make sure that there's growth, and there's growth in the opportunities for the other party.
Is there any different consideration made if there's multiple businesses, or is each business kind of thought of as its own thing?
Well, sometimes you have passive businesses and active businesses, and the active business kind of generates the income for the passive businesses. Mm-hmm. Passive businesses are valued very differently. They're typically valued on a different basis, because you're not looking at direct and indirect contributions to the building of the business, and you're not looking at sweat equity. You're looking at passive market activity, which is causing the value of that particular entity to go up in value. So, for example, you own a business which makes widgets, and the widget factory is your active business, and you go there every day and you do your thing. So the wife may receive 20 or 30% of that, but she may receive 50% of the limited liability partnership you opened, which is with a hedge fund, okay, and is generating market appreciation, or a house that was purchased as an investment.
If people can negotiate on their own and not get the courts involved, I suppose then that's obviously the ideal situation. Or does the court always involved in some degree of business asset distribution?
No, there are plenty of times when people work these things out on their own. The more money you have, the more privacy you want. I mean, True. You don't want your business being valued and then, God forbid, a court officer leaking it, or God forbid, your lawyer leaking it, or the other lawyer leaking it. You want to basically have confidentiality orders put in place, or confidentiality agreements put in place, and you want these things valued in private.
Yeah, that's a good point. What advice do you give business owners who are going through a divorce, who want to ensure that their business stays protected and is fairly valued during the process, during the proceedings?
Go back, look at your books, make sure everything's clean. If they're not clean, work it out with an accountant. Hire somebody, but clean everything up.
And by clean everything up, you mean?
I mean your payroll, your situation with regard to paying credit cards through your business, a situation where you're paying your car through your business. Is it legitimate? Is it not legitimate? Your home office expenses. Are you taking off for one little room that you're using, or you're writing off your entire mortgage, which I've seen before, unfortunately.
Really?
Yeah. Well, instead of just writing off one little room that you use for your home office, people are writing off half their homes or 3/4 of their homes.
I didn't know I could do that, Yoni.
You can't do that, Kevin.
Oh, okay.
No. And if you are doing it, hire an accountant to have someone clean up the business.
Okay. Appreciate the tip. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in to Law and Life, the Levoritz Approach, with attorney Yoni Levoritz. To connect with Yoni, head to levoritzlaw.com, and please like and subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. Yoni, always great chatting with you. Thanks so much.
Great chatting with you too, Kevin. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.